And this is why you see many vegans, by the way, when women vegans lose their hair when they go vegan, it's because they're not getting enough cholesterol because
Hmm.
they can't produce DHT, and DHT you need for hair. So that's another thing. Estrone, estradiol, estriol, the three estrogens. Every single one of those estrogens is essential for female reproduction as well as not getting cancer, by the way. That's a really, really big one. Not feeling PMS pain. You want to avoid PMS pain almost altogether, actually, for that matter. There are many, many examples of other carnivore women who have managed to get rid of this completely. And it's because, once again, this is related to cholesterol and hormones. And it doesn't stop there. Aldosterone in regulating blood pressure. Where does that come from? Cholesterol. So
Mm.
another really, really big one. Cortisol, corticosterone. Where does that come from? Cholesterol. Once again, it's endless, honestly.
Yeah, I know.
Pregnenolone, allopregnenolone, really important in regulating
That's
mood.
right. Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. Are you curious about the science behind the carnivore diet, how it works, and why it's so effective from a biochemistry perspective? And if you are, I would not be surprised because one of the reasons I became a doctor was to better understand how the human body works. And understanding the biochemistry of your diet is crucial because it helps you make informed decisions about what you eat and how it affects your body. The food we consume is broken down in our digestive system into various nutrients that our body uses for energy and other functions. Different nutrients have different effects on our body's biochemistry, influencing processes such as metabolism, hormone production, and cell function. So, by understanding how these nutrients work together in our body, we can tailor our diet to meet our individual needs and goals. So, in today's episode, we will look behind the curtain of the carnivore diet, and we will do that with today's guest, who is Blaise V. Now, Blaise is a YouTube educational content creator with a passion for exploring science, health, and diet topics, applying science to everyday life and making it practical and easy to digest. His content combines a strong analytical approach with a bit of humor. I checked out one of your recent videos and I did laugh, aiming to dive deep into complex issues like nutrition and human physiology, often debunking myths or uncovering lesser known facts. Whether it's through discussing diet and the biochemistry behind the carnivore diet or experimenting on himself, he seeks to engage his audience by blending rigorous science, which is very important, with real world applications and education. And here's the bonus: Blaise is ranked number 27 out of 100 million as a League of Legends player, which is insane. So, with that, Blaise, I am so happy we found each other, and I'm so happy you're out here spreading this word. And welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on. I'm definitely glad to be here.
Absolutely, and we're gonna have some fun. We're hopefully the biochemistry won't be too much for people, but it is important that we understand why we do what we do. And one of the beauties of being in a low carb, keto, and carnivore community is that we're all doing this based on science, right? We're not just randomly doing something. That's why you have doctors and professors and scientists doing it, because it actually has the science to back it. And although I struggled a little bit in biochemistry, how ironic is that? But it's become my favorite subject because of what I do as a doctor now. So let's get started, my friend, by telling my audience how you've come to know so much about the carnivore diet.
Well, that's a really, really long story. I got a little lucky, but first I ran into intermittent fasting and I was sort of interested in how to basically live longer at a certain time when I hit 20 or 19 years old. And after that point, I said, well, let's see if there's anything more that I can figure out. Like, I see that fasting is good, but why is it good? So then I try to figure out why fasting is good, what fasting promotes. And then afterwards, I end up running into even longer fasting, not just intermittent fasting, but 3 days, 6 days, 9 days, and people reporting like benefits after the third day, especially. And I'm going, what's going on? Why is this happening? What might be some of the reasons behind this? And then afterwards, that was around 2020, about 2022, I luckily managed to run into Benjamin Bickman and Anthony Chafee. Now, Benjamin Bickman talks a lot about the insulin to glucagon ratio. Very, very important. I mean, incredible work. And it's really important in understanding that and like weight gain and all that. And it explains everything there. And Anthony Chafee also, I did manage to discover. And he said plants are trying to kill you. And then I was like, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true. So I decided, I was like, okay, let's see the research behind this, because I was looking for something and I was stuck for 2 years and I was only doing fasting and I was trying to find the next step.
Yeah.
So I found something crazy and I was like, well, let's run with it. Let's see whether or not this is true or not. So I do my research, and then it turns out plants do have phytotoxins and they have tons of other things. So I was like, okay, well, let's put this to the test, because I also heard a little bit about mewing before I even did this. And I also heard about basically the oral microbiome and like teeth health.
That's
So I
right.
was like, let's see if there's anything to this. So I decided, if the carnivore diet really does work that well, I will be a living test subject and proof to see whether or not it does or it doesn't work. And
That's
the
right.
second I start my carnivore diet, I will stop brushing my teeth.
Wow.
And that and today yeah, as you can tell, I actually have not brushed my teeth for literally 2 years, which is absolutely absurd. We're almost hitting 3 years here. I went to the dentist, by the way, and even the dentist himself said, wow, it looks like your teeth are really good. It's like you brush every day. And that was the moment I knew. I looked at that and I went, I did something very right, because I didn't have to brush my teeth. Clearly, prehistoric humans didn't brush their teeth either, or
Mm-hmm.
something along those lines. And my teeth are perfectly healthy. The dentist thinks my teeth are perfectly healthy. There's no plaque. What's going on?
That's
So, yeah, there's a lot of other
wow.
crazy things,
Well,
but
there's some influencers. I haven't dived deep yet, but that are really a dental professional who's out there saying what we do with our teeth is not really right. And I'm not sure how she goes into the diet part, but she talks about how flossing and brushing are really not necessary, and that is pretty amazing to hear you have that type of outcome. So that's going to be interesting. So that's an interesting way to start the podcast. So that's really deep. But I will absolutely say I hear, from patients that their dental hygiene gets much better. Everything gets better when they eat this way. So that is very interesting. And I guess the other part of it is there's other things I think you've benefited from that you've shared. So let's dive a little bit into just a few of the medical type things that may have gotten better as you've changed your diet.
yeah. Yeah, I might even end up along the lines of Kent Carnivore. If anybody doesn't know, he lost his colon because of he had some really bad gut autoimmune problems. And there was a chance that I would have been somewhere along those lines as well. And the reason is because I remember one day, there's actually many days that this would happen. I would feel stomach pain, stomach bloating, and I thought that was normal after you eat. I was so accustomed to it, I didn't even ask anybody else. Is like, oh yeah, I thought it was just a regular part of eating. Getting tired after you eat, I thought that was a regular part. I thought all these things were regular parts of eating and just life. And one day, around 2018 or 2019, I was in so much pain at around 12 in the morning. Literally, it went 11:59 p.m. to straight to 12, and it was like a complete disaster. I was in so much pain. I genuinely thought I was going to die, and I
Mm,
accepted dying, and I accepted death because it was so painful.
mm,
I looked up at the sky, I looked up at the stars, I was laying on a table, and I went, if it's my day today, it's my day.
mhm.
And I was shocked, because I was calm, but at the same time I was like, if like, why would it have to be like this?
Right,
And
right.
that sort of that kind of got me in the direction of like, maybe it was something I ate. Maybe there's
Mhm.
something that I'm doing wrong here. There has to be something else to it, because this isn't supposed to. I don't think that this should be happening. So yeah, I had a really, really bad stomach problems. I don't. I didn't necessarily get it diagnosed, but I most certainly do have IBS at the very,
Hmm.
very least.
Yeah.
I also had chronic fatigue regularly. I was an athlete and I did tons of sports, varsity all the time. Growing up, 5, 6 years old, 2 years old, playing tennis with a badminton racket. It was really, really just a lot of sports, and I would feel tired all the
Hmm.
time for no reason, exhausted, and I didn't know why. Um, it was just a thing that existed. Chronic fatigue, brain fog, that was a really big one. In brain fog is actually when I got rid of that. That's when I reached rank 27 challenger in North America. That's when I got the highest, like really, really high ranking. Tons of other things ended up happening when I cleared the brain fog. I mean, there's so many other things. My face used to be covered in acne. It would be red,
Mm.
completely red. Red all here, red all here. My lymph nodes would be like outwards like this. It was
Hmm.
terrible. Chest acne. I used to have tons of cystic chest acne. I even went to the dermatologist and he's like, yeah, I honestly have no idea what it is. So if you want, you could try this cream, but otherwise, I really don't
Right.
know how to fix this. Yes, the
That's right.
classic. So
Yeah.
eczema on my back. I mean, the list was endless. Muscle
Yeah.
pain in my like lower back. I would get muscle pain, and I had no idea why any of this was happening. And yeah,
Wow.
carnivore just
Just
all
fix it.
gone.
It's pretty amazing how so many things get fixed. And again, for people who haven't tried, carnivore or even low carb or keto, it's hard to imagine it's true. One of my previous guests, who I have not released the video version as of this recording, was Sarah Catherine. They were sisters who one was specializing in diabetes as a nurse, and the other was specializing in IBS. And they shared this app, Monash app, Monash, I think, which for people who are carnivore and want to maybe add some things back, the app will tell you what things people who what IBS tend to tolerate. Now, having said that, I'm living a pretty good life as a carnivore, so I'm going to kind of stay in that lane for a while. But it's nice to know that if you want to have a moment of indulgence, you'll have a tool to help you. But your story sounds like mine. It was, even though I'm a doctor, I kind of self-diagnosed myself once I saw the symptoms and saw how I was responding. But my life is so different now that I don't have to deal with that. So for all those people out there who are critical of making these types of dietary changes, I can only say that if you live in a body that's had to suffer like we have, I'm not sure you would be so critical. So I just think people should do what's best for them and for me. And it sounds like for you, carnivore has been a win. So now, one more thing I want to kind of high level before we go into any biochemistry. The carnivore Harvard study obviously was, important. We need to do more research. But when you looked at the Harvard study, what kind of stands out at things that people should be aware of?
So the Harvard study had a lot of things. First off, the autoimmune problems of many of the people went away. And by the way, I wouldn't even necessarily, I don't know if I would call it a carnivore study because it was a
Yeah.
lot of animal based.
Yeah.
So even it's amazing because even on animal based, at the very least, people's autoimmune problems just vanished.
Yeah.
Type 2 diabetes medication, I think it was 98% of them quit their type 2 diabetes
Yeah.
medication, which is absolutely absurd. Urologic problems, dermatology, like acne, for instance, dermatology problems all went away. The list was endless. I mean, they had more muscle mass. They felt like they had more energy, more physical energy, and most certainly they did because they were giving themselves enough amino acids.
That's
Uh,
right.
I mean, the amount of things that study showed all aligns completely with the biochemistry.
That's
Because
right.
if you align it with the biochemistry, it would make sense. This is why people's dermatology problems just
Hmm.
completely went away. This is
Okay.
why people's weight, they lost weight so quickly. This is why. I mean, the list, it's endless, honestly. The amount of things that it fixes is it's almost everything for that matter that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's right.
Hormones, it's related in everything. I mean, the biochemistry explains all of it. And all the Harvard study does was literally confirm that meat is very, very essential when it comes to so many processes in the body, because without it, you have type 2 diabetes, you have these skin problems, you're giving yourself constant inflammation, you're aging yourself quicker as well. There's a lot of biochemistry to it, and it's really amazing, honestly, because that study was the the
Yeah.
bullseye.
Well, it gives you permission to move forward if the influencer like myself and yourself didn't convince you, then maybe Harvard could. Uh, Ironically, an institution that tends to lean plant-based, but you can't argue with the science, right? That's what's cool about research. Is like when you do research, whether it's observational or randomized trials, it is what it is. So no matter what your belief system is, you have to go with that. So I really am happy that that study's out there. And I think we'll start our discussion about the various things that impact our body from a nutrition perspective with a little biochemistry. Is what you said earlier. You said, you know what? Plants have phytotoxins, and that was one of the things that Dr. Anthony Chaffee was emphasizing, and something that really caught your attention. So tell us a little bit about some of the benefits of avoiding plants in our diet from that perspective.
Okay. Yeah, so this is once again, phytotoxins are a big deal, but first, it's a little important to understand kind of why they're a big deal. Now, inflammation is important to understand inflammation first in order to understand why phytotoxins are kind of bad. Now, inflammation is kind of bad when you're stimulating it over and over and over again. And the
Mhm.
only reason you should really be having inflammation is either you uh, basically hurt yourself one way or another, like you, for instance, really you broke your arm and then suddenly inflammation occurs, or maybe it could be whether or not you're sick and then suddenly pathogens are in your system, then your immune cells go to work and they protect you. But otherwise, stimulating inflammation is not good. It's really, really bad. I sort of view it as a very crazy neighbor. I have a video on that. I don't want to say the
Ha!
words, but it's a very, very crazy neighbor who isn't the person that you want to invite over for help. And every
Mm,
single time you're eating plants or these phytotoxins, you're basically inviting him over and over again.
that's
So,
crazy.
so that's the important thing to understand about inflammation and why it's like really, really
Yeah,
bad.
that's right.
But when it comes to phytotoxins, there's like plenty of them. And some of them don't, in fact, don't even necessarily cause the same inflammatory response, but they have plenty, and I mean plenty of different ways of causing damage. So just to name one of them, cyanide, for instance, cyanogenic glycosides, which are found in almonds, are converted into cyanide, and cyanide's a really big deal because what it'll do is it will bind to cytochrome C in oxidative phosphorylation, which is between complex 3 and complex 4, and it will just completely render it inactive. Now, that's a
Mm,
really big deal because that means you're getting no energy from that cell. And that's the more extreme phytotoxin. Literally, cyanide's used as a poison.
right,
So
literally.
hopefully we know like that's really bad. That's just cyanogenic glycosides. There are plenty more. My case, for instance, the thing that was probably killing my stomach was lectins,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
lectins absolutely destroy the tight junctions of the stomach. And by the way,
Hmm.
they're called tight for a reason. They're supposed to stay tight. They're not
That's right.
supposed to be loose. So what they'll do, like for instance, what they'll do is they'll bind to the outside of a carbohydrate on the cell, and it'll stimulate an autoimmune response because other things will pick that signal up, and it'll go like, uh-oh, this is a big
Hmm.
deal. So
Hmm.
suddenly you get this giant rave. The rave your neighbor is putting out is suddenly coming to your house, and you don't want him coming to your house. He
Right.
wrecks everything. There's drinks all over the place or something. There could be the bush is cut off for no reason. The yard is trampled. Everything has gone wrong. So you're just like a little bit of damage here and there, here and there. There's also, as well, it doesn't just stop there because chemotherapy drugs, by the way, a lot of these chemotherapy drugs, they're actually phytotoxins. Literally, they're just
Mm.
a concentrated version of a phytotoxin. So another example could be like curcumin. There's like a really long list actually. Curcumin, quercetin, solanine. I mean, it's really, really long. But
Hmm.
all these phytotoxins. So, for instance, curcumin found in turmeric, that one will basically stimulate reactive oxygen species. And by the way, that's exactly what causes the cancer in the first place, is reactive oxygen species, because that
Mm.
has to cause the mitochondrial dysfunction, which is why, by the way, with some of these cancer therapies, like this chemotherapy stuff, one of the side effects is another kind of cancer being formed. This is why, because the reactive oxygen species will end up damaging the mitochondria, and now you have a higher chance of having that mitochondrial dysfunction. And if the cell doesn't realize it's supposed to kill itself, which most people it won't, because they're constantly stimulating insulin, which prevents apoptosis, then lo and behold, now you got a cancerous cell and you got tons of this reactive oxygen species, and all it's doing is it's just basically stimulate or really damaging the mitochondria and causing cancer to proliferate. So now you have two cancers instead of one.
Mm.
So that's just one example. Not a good one, by the
Yeah.
way.
No,
Solanine is another one. Solanine is found in like eggplants, tomatoes, potatoes. I mean, there's a really long list of
that's
those
right.
again.
That's right.
You want to avoid that one. Another chemotherapy drug, by the way, once again, does the exact same thing. You don't want to do that. Same with quercetin. Quercetin's found in like shallots. I think rhubarb was another one. Uh, does the exact same thing basically. It just all it is it's literally just causing more inflammation, and in
That's right.
turn that can cause that reactive oxygen species. Well,
That's
reactive
right.
oxygen species will be generated a different way in this case,
That's right.
but yeah, that reactive oxygen species will cause that mitochondrial dysfunction, and that's how you get cancer. You can't get cancer otherwise. So it's once again, it's a really, really big deal when it comes to like those drugs. There's also capsaicin, by the way. Yes, capsaicin will also, that's also a chemotherapy drug, by the way. Capsaicin, by the way, for anybody who doesn't know, is basically spice. So that
That's
spice
right.
that you get, yeah, that induces cellular senescence. And that's kind of a big deal, because senescence is where the cell looks at itself and it goes, oh, I'm not going to perform my functions. And then it just doesn't perform its functions, but it's still alive. And that's not a good thing. You don't want that, because what happens is cellular senescence ends up leading to, you guessed it, a higher chance of a cancerous cell, because all it takes is a little bit of reactive oxygen species in the form of a hydrogen peroxide or hydroxyl free radicals. There's plenty of different kinds of them, and it'll attack that mitochondria, the right spot of the mitochondria, or even the nucleus for that matter. It'll mess up a specific part of the DNA, and now
That's
the
right.
cell just doesn't know when to stop proliferating. So it just keeps going on and on and on. So it's like it's this constant, like, every one of these phytotoxins does this. The only difference is when you're eating these things, you're giving yourself a micro dose of chemotherapy.
Hmm.
It's not
Hmm.
necessarily a
Right.
full dose, but you're still giving yourself that dose, which is, I mean, this is why many people, this is one of the main reasons, in fact, that I think many people experience cancer today is literally because of this. It's just
Hmm.
stimulating that inflammatory response. And remember, the microdose, one of those side effects of chemotherapy is a cancer existing in another spot. And that's exactly what
Mm.
you're doing when you eat this stuff.
That's right.
So
That's right. Wow. That's I feel like we just I don't watch TV a lot. And when the drug commercials come on, they have like, they talk real fast and tell you all the negative effects. It sounds like we may have to change the commercials that deal with high lectin containing foods, things like, and one of the things I really keep out of sight are peanuts because my wife's ketovore. And so I know peanuts have a lot of lectins as an example. And maybe when they have the commercial for the peanuts or the whole grains or, the raw potatoes and all those things that are high in lectins, we need to put a warning. And so for those people, I did a video talking about, are we loony because we're carnivore? And I think what these types of conversations help people understand is that no, we're not loony at all. We have a life experience that have led us to this information, and we have the life experience that not only says what happens on paper in the biochemistry text, but what happens to our body when we ingest these things. So, as much as I like peanuts, if I eat them, my body will remind me at some point down the road. So I really appreciate that thorough discussion. Hopefully, we're not scaring people too far away because some of my audience is low carb and keto, and they just do non-starchy plants. But having said that, we also another thing that's important to understand is this comparison between glucose and fructose. We know that both of those are bad in excess, but I know in my training I learned that fructose, some people call it fructose, that's more dangerous than glucose. So what would you say about that?
I would say there's a little bit of caveat there. They're actually kind of both dangerous. I think that glucose itself is actually the primary cause of age. There's a lot of stuff to this, but we'll just start with fructose, for instance, because it's more simple. So fructose and glucose, they're both pretty much the same thing when it comes to glycation, except one of them causes it way, way more. And glycation is
Mhm.
basically where the glucose molecule will bind to a lipid or a protein, doesn't really matter, and it'll render it inactive. And that's kind of a big deal because that means that it just stops working, and you don't necessarily want that for your cells. Now, in fructose, it's around 8 to 10 times higher chance of doing that. But in glucose, it's a little bit lower, and there's a couple things. But first off, glucose isn't just, by the way, glucose. There's three forms of glucose, which is kind of a big deal because when you're spiking your insulin, this is what's causing that high amount of glycation, which, by the way, can lead to a heart attack, or I mean, there's plenty of other things that it can lead to. But for instance, when you're spiking glucose, what ends up happening is because there's three forms, first alpha D-glucopyranose, beta D-glucopyranose, and then just D-glucose. These two are fine because they're cyclic and they're more stable. But in chemistry, there's equilibrium states. And sadly, the third one, yep, that's right, that third one causes glycation. And it's very,
Mhm.
very unstable because it's basically this straight chain. And when you're spiking, once again, you spike that glucose. That means you have more of that straight chain. And now, lo and behold, you have glycation on the endothelium, which is literally the only way that you can possibly get the heart attack is damaging the endothelium enough in one way or another. You can also do it through reactive oxygen species or lipid peroxidation. There's many, many things, but that's a big deal. And that's why glucose is kind of bad. Glucose is a little worse though, but I'll probably cover that later because that's a little more complicated and that dives into a whole different topic. So,
Yeah, as you're talking, I know you have your, I assume, gaming life, and you're a superstar there. Um, you, what's your education in science? Because this could be over the head of a lot of people, but where is your foundation just really being a good researcher, student, or do you have any other background that helps you to understand this stuff better?
um, So there's a lot of things that make me that helped me understand this. Part of it, I would have to say, is actually I don't know if it's a personality trait or what. It's kind of being obsessive, but I'm like
Yeah.
I get really crazy about something. So if I find something interesting, I go full on, which
You
is
just go into it. Yeah.
exactly right. This is how I did the whole not brushing my teeth thing because it
That's
seems
right.
ridiculous, which it is, by the way. Like, no, don't get me wrong. In today's society, it's absolutely absurd. But the only way that in from my experience, anyways, learn things like really, really well is just by
Mhm.
experiencing it and going,
Yes.
okay, well, let's experience it. Not only after that, after experiencing it, let's see if it lines up with the science. And where do I find this science? Well, a lot of the science I do find on YouTube. I sadly don't get much from college, honestly, but I did get some from college. I
Mhm.
got a little bit lucky. In biochemistry, for instance, I learned a little bit, but the only problem is when I learned it from college, I wasn't satisfied because they gave some things that didn't line up to me. Like, for instance, the professor would be like, oh, yeah, by the way, glucose is the primary fuel source of the brain. And by the way, glucose only produces like 30 ATP compared to
Mhm.
fatty acid, which produces like 100 ATP.
That's
And
right.
I was like, does like there's something doesn't line up here, like
That's right.
glucose being the primary energy source of the
I know
brain.
it doesn't make sense. Yeah. It's that, yeah,
Oh,
we have a lot of fat that's going to give us a lot of energy. So why not consume and use our body fat? It just everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. And as I think about the next biochemistry question, I do want to say that for those who are watching us, um, you know, why not just focus on what's important in your life. So if you have a medical concern, with the help of others who have maybe the training and the skill set, just do what my friend here is doing, what Blaise is doing. Just give it a little extra attention because, to be honest with you, you're a clinician or anybody that you're using, it's an assembly line. They're just trying to get through the day. I mentioned, I may have 30 people on my schedule tomorrow. So it's very important that we take ownership, and I appreciate you doing that. And hopefully your personality contributed to you being able to then get in front of people like now and rattle all of this nonsense off. But I do think it's very helpful. And for those who are struggling with some of the nuance, just check it out a second time, rewind, check it out, look up some stuff yourself. But the goal is to give you, as we talk, foundational things to think about, and then more research you can do on your own. So let's talk about the next thing that I wanted to put in front of the audience, which is a topic that we talk about often in the low carb community, which is how the bioavailability of food is so important, and how the bioavailability of food from animals may be better than plants. So just could you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, there's there's a lot of stuff here.
Yeah.
I don't know how far you want me to go into this, but in terms of vitamin and mineral interactions, just to give an example, when
Yeah.
it comes to bioavailability, like even if you're eating these plants with tons of iron in them, you can
Yeah.
still be anemic because
Yes.
they will have so many ways to counteract you from absorbing that iron. And it could be excess vitamin E, which, by the way, they do it. The reason why they have so much vitamin E and plants have such high vitamin E content is because they're literally killing themselves at such a
Hmm.
rapid rate. That's one reason why they have it. The second thing they can do is use phytates, which will form this like complex around that iron, and then now you can't absorb that anymore, and it does that around non-heme iron, which is
Hmm.
another part, by the way, because lo and behold, plants have non-heme iron, which the bioavailability is like 5 to
I
20%,
know.
if not
That's
5
it.
to 10%, by the way.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
probably lower.
Yeah.
The list is endless. Oxalates have mineral affinity, so now the oxalate is going to be stealing your iron. Like the list of
It's
these phytotoxins, every single one of them, they just keep targeting iron. I don't know why. I don't know if it's
yeah.
like part of plant evolution or what it is, but they seem to always target iron.
Yeah. And
So
when I talk to my patients about this, I always use the example of spinach, and I compare it to maybe a steak, and they're just shocked when I say you may get 2% of the iron out of the spinach. That's it. And you're literally eating spinach for the iron, and you may get 35 to 40 or more percent from that piece of beef or steak. So it's kind of logical. But again, I wanted to put that in front of people. I want people to do more research because, like you said, it's a deep topic. But please do not, if you see a person that's frail, pale looking, and they are plant based, don't be surprised because they literally would probably have to. I mean, imagine how much spinach you would have to eat for that 2% to be you'll be spending a lot of time in the bathroom. So
oh man.
let's go to another topic, which is I like to talk about this because people are so afraid of scurvy, and this ideal of if you're not eating fruit, you're certainly gonna get scurvy. You're gonna have a deficiency of the vitamin C. So could you tell us why carnivores shouldn't be so worried about that?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of detail to this. So first off, we in specifically meat has dehydroascorbic acid, which one is way more bioavailable because it actually can compete for multiple transporters. And the second reason has to do with the indirect fact that you're not stimulating glucose. And that's kind of a big deal in this case because ascorbic acid, or in this case, the vitamin C, actually competes for the same transporter, GLUT4, than the glucose. And that's a big deal
Yeah,
because if you're elevated insulin, it doesn't matter if you pound down 100 pounds of like vitamin C. If your insulin's high, you're not going to get much
right.
because the glucose is competing for it. So that's a really, really big deal there. And that's just vitamin C. Not only that, we already know that by the way, animals have high, especially organ meats, can have some very, very high vitamin C content.
Hmm.
A brain is just one example of an organ meat that has really, really high C content. But there also is skeletal muscle does have vitamin C as well. And you don't have to worry so much, even if you're not eating the brain, for instance, you don't have to
Hmm.
worry as long as your insulin isn't really, really elevated because you're mixing in carbohydrate with meat, or
Right.
you're just as long there's a lot of ways that you can elevate insulin, but in this case, mixing carbohydrate with meat will skyrocket the insulin to glucagon ratio, which
That's
in
right.
turn will prevent the vitamin C absorption. And yeah, I mean, I even had a friend for that matter who was vitamin C deficient. And he's like, man, I'm taking these supplements and I'm getting nothing. And I was like, well, the reason you're getting nothing is because your insulin's so elevated. He's
That's right.
eating cupcakes, he's eating
That's
bread,
right.
and then he's mixing in a little bit of like bacon and meat. And I mean,
Hmm.
it's good that you're mixing the meat in, but the cupcakes and the bread, that just skyrockets that insulin to glucagon ratio.
That's right.
And now suddenly your cell can't tell the difference between vitamin C and glucose. And that's a big deal. So yeah.
Nice. I love it, man. So for all those folk out there worried about scurvy and bleedy gums, of course, my Blaze would never have bleedy gums. We already talked about that. Stop worrying. It sounds like Blaze has made it very clear your body will be more efficient at utilizing the vitamin C in this dietary pattern. And guess what? It's very likely that if you're a carnivore or you're in a nice ketotic state, you're not going to have a high insulin level, so you have to worry about that. So it's really reassuring that that's true. Now, one of the things that bugged, I'm sure you and me, was fiber, and I was doing my best. I was plant based for 8 years or so, and I just kept pushing the fiber because all the experts said, when you're not doing well, eat even more fiber so you can be even more bloated and more gassy. So, when it comes to fiber, which is very controversial with the conventional mindset, why are carnivores not to worry about not consuming fiber? Because essentially we assume nearly zero fiber.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's actually a couple ways that we can look at this, but just from the digestive tract perspective, we can't actually do anything with that fiber because we don't have a cecum, and every single herbivore basically has a cecum, and it can actually convert that fiber into fatty acid. But here's the really interesting thing, is both carnivores and herbivores use the same energy. They both use fatty acid, usually, unless it's like a hummingbird. There's some rare exceptions. But for the most part, carnivores and herbivores do use specifically fatty acid for energy. So because of that, it's a really big deal. When you look at it, the plants, they're eating the plants, they're turning that fiber into short chain fatty acids, and then they're using fatty acids as the main fuel source. And the carnivore is doing the exact same thing, but it's not getting its fatty acid from the plant. It's getting its fatty acid from the meat. So that's a one really, really big deal. Also, when it comes to fiber, you can't actually get anything out of it. It doesn't really do anything for your stomach. It actually just all it does is cause bloating. And the
That's
reason
right.
is because it partially ferments. It doesn't even fully ferment because you don't have a cecum. So you can't
That's
actually
right.
do anything with it. And now it's this extra bulk to your stool, which actually leaves people constipated, by the way. It causes
Right.
way more problems than just constipation. In my case, for instance, and Ken Carnivore's case for that matter. It can cause things like anal bleeding. It can cause things like stomach cramps, stomach pain, just constipation. It's really, really bad. So yeah, this is once again, fiber is not only not essential, it causes more problems than
That's
you
right.
want to be introducing, which
Yeah.
you don't want to do. Not,
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it.
That's right. Sounds like a plan. I know I've done a video about fiber, so if they search my name, they'll see that. Have you done videos about fiber? I'm sure, maybe.
I plan on covering it
Are you gonna
eventually.
cover? You
I
haven't covered it yet. And by the
so
way, guys, stop this podcast. Go subscribe to his channel. How can they get to your YouTube channel? Let's say that out loud.
So my YouTube channel is at Blaise V. So basically Blaise, B as in boy, L as in Larry, AISE, and then V. And I have about 3,000 subscribers right now.
Yep.
I am basically trying to teach the biochemistry and just education in general because I think that it's really important to understand a lot of really important concepts of the world, especially with the upcoming AI thing. I'm not
That's
going to talk
right.
about that, but
Yeah.
I I think it's really important to understand certain topics. Biochemistry, once again, I think I talk a lot about the biochemistry, especially. I have a playlist called The Science Behind Carnivore, and
That's
I'm
right.
working on it. I'm going to improve it. It's already finished, but it basically explains all of the science behind why carnivore works in the first
Hmm.
place. It covers everything, literally everything. I'm not aware of anything that it doesn't cover for that matter. It will explain every single topic that I talk about here. And it will not only do that, it will list and reference studies.
That's
It
right.
also shows you like the mechanism in terms of the biochemistry, what's happening. Why is the electron attacking this, for
That's
instance?
right. That's right.
Um, I try to make it as educational as possible so you can actually learn and understand why carnivore even works in the first place. Because for me, that was the main reason why I even did it, was
That's
because I
right.
was like, I want to know the science. I don't necessarily just want to do it and say like, oh, I feel
That's
good.
right. That's
It could be
right.
like it could be a placebo effect. So what do I
That's
know?
right. Yeah, you got to make it make sense. And certainly I felt better as a plant-based person. I felt better low carb. I felt better with keto. I felt, so, but you have to be curious enough to keep moving forward. But more importantly, if we can understand why this is working, at least you can stand before yourself when you're looking in the mirror and say, you know what, this makes sense. I understand the science. And it may not be the ideal diet for everybody, but certainly it's the ideal diet for me. And that's kind of what I would say. So I just wanted to put you in front of us with that information because um, there's so many things we're not going to touch on because the list is long. And I just wanted to make sure people knew how to get more information, rather it's from YouTube or the other resources that you're going to make available. Let's go to the question of let's stay in the biochemistry sphere, which is the Randle cycle, which is a biochemical term people may not be aware of. Could you talk about what that is and its relationship to the risk for heart disease? Because that's the number one killer. And that's why I tell everybody to get a heart scan, a coronary artery calcium score test, get a fasting insulin, figure out where you stand. But I think understanding the Randle cycle may be helpful as well. So what would you say about that?
Yeah. Yeah, this is actually they go hand in hand, the insulin to glucagon ratio with the Randle cycle, because the insulin to glucagon ratio, all it does is it sort of tells you the broader perspective of mixing fat and mixing glucose will end up skyrocketing insulin, but you don't necessarily know the reason why until you look at the Randle cycle. And then when you look at the
Yeah.
Randle cycle, it all makes sense. You go, oh, that's why. So for instance, the Randle cycle is basically the cell's competition between either glucose or fatty acid. And it can either choose one to take glucose in or fatty acid. Now, it's not very, very exclusive. Like it does alternate between them sometimes, but I'm not gonna go into that stuff. It's pretty much just either glucose or it's fatty acid. Now, the thing is, when you stimulate one of them, you block the other one. So if you
Mhm.
stimulate glucose, then you block out the fatty acid. And if you stimulate fatty acid, you block out the glucose. And why exactly does insulin skyrocket? Because the Randle cycle says when you're stimulating both the glucose and the fatty acid gets locked out of the mitochondria. It doesn't get locked outside into the bloodstream, it gets locked out of the mitochondria of the cell. The glucose, though, gets blocked out of the cell. And that is a really big deal because, once again,
Bingo.
this is where glycation comes into play. And glycation, it'll basically damage the endothelium in one way or another. And all you're doing is when you're stimulating both of these, you're causing higher amounts of this glycation. And you're going to get glycation on the endothelium. You're going to end up, that's the only way you can get a calcification for that matter. And after that, it also partially comes into play with LDL and VLDL, more specifically VLDL. It has to do with VLDL carrying triglycerides, and basically, when you're skyrocketing insulin to glucagon ratio, once again, higher amounts of triglycerides. And if you have low LDL at that point as well, then I mean, you're most certainly, I would expect a heart attack, or I would expect something along those lines, because yeah, Dave Feldman did some really good work on that as well. I mean, he was my introduction into this whole thing
Mm,
of like the heart attack. I was like, oh my
that's
God,
right.
my LDL is
That's
so
right.
high. And then I looked at his work and I was like, this is interesting. So yeah, that's just
That's
one. That's
right.
a part of it, though. That's a little part of it.
That's right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned him because that may be a good transition to people may not know about a Randle cycle, and thank you for introducing them to it, but they know a lot about cholesterol. At least they hear that term from their doctors often. So um, I think it's important that people not demonize cholesterol. So, from your perspective and your research, why should humans not be afraid of cholesterol?
I think I don't think they should just be afraid of it. I think they should be, from my understanding of how this works, they should be eating it a lot more. And
Right.
there's a lot of reasons why. So cholesterol, just to name a few examples, by the way, cholesterol is essential for pretty much every single sex steroid hormone that you can think of, as well as a couple other hormones and vitamin D synthesis and bile acid. So it's really essential. And by the way, if you don't eat cholesterol, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to make enough of it
That's
because
right.
cholesterol is really expensive for the body to make. And it's a really, really long thing. But basically, the cholesterol hormone synthesis cascade, what does cholesterol make? Well, you have enough testosterone. Well, yeah, guess where it comes from? It comes from cholesterol. What about DHT and hair loss, or maybe even DHT and masculine features, even women losing their hair because of a lack of DHT? That's right. It's because a lack of cholesterol. And this is why you see many vegans, by the way, when women vegans lose their hair when they go vegan, it's because they're not getting enough cholesterol because
Hmm.
they can't produce DHT, and DHT you need for hair. So that's another thing. Estrone, estradiol, estriol, the three estrogens. Every single one of those estrogens is essential for female reproduction, as well as not getting cancer, by the way. That's a really, really big one. Not feeling PMS pain. You want to avoid PMS pain almost altogether, actually, for that matter. There are many, many examples of other carnivore women who have managed to get rid of this completely. And it's because, once again, this is related to cholesterol and hormones. And it doesn't stop there. Aldosterone in regulating blood pressure. Where does that come from? Cholesterol. So
Mm.
another really, really big one. Cortisol, corticosterone. Where does that come from? Cholesterol. Once again, it's endless, honestly.
Yeah, I know.
Pregnenolone, allopregnenolone, really important in regulating
That's
mood.
right.
So if you're moody, this is probably could be a reason why, because allopregnenolone regulates mood. The immune system attacks the baby. That could be related to pregnenolone and a lack of it, or maybe too much of it, and it's because of plant sterols and stuff. So the cholesterol is essential, and that's just covering the surface of it. There are
That's right.
so many other things. I mean, yeah. So I wouldn't just say like avoid low LDL. I would say high LDL is what you want,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
high
Yeah.
LDL tells you you're using that cholesterol, because that's what LDL is. LDL is just low density lipoprotein, meaning it carries cholesterol. That's all it does. So if you have high LDL, that means you have, and you're using basically high amounts of cholesterol, and that's important for hormone synthesis, and not just hormone synthesis, vitamin D synthesis, bile acids. There's a couple ones that I didn't mention, a couple of androgens that I didn't mention, but yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of really, really big things.
Well, I'm excited. First of all, I am a new subscriber to your YouTube channel. Let's say that first. I just
Thank you.
started following you on Twitter. Looks like your Twitter account was not an old account. It was pretty new, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't been posting as much as I want to. I
Yeah.
want to try to get really, really high quality content first,
Yes,
like a really,
absolutely.
really good video. And then after I get a really, really good video, then I'll
You'll
make a
kind of
short
get
and
out
then I can
there.
put it on
Absolutely.
Twitter. So
You also, there's so much information. We could do a 5 hour podcast and it would be long enough. So, but in terms of like writing this and putting it on paper, how do you plan on putting this in front of people beyond your YouTube channel?
yeah, so I do plan on writing a book as well, and it will cover all of this. Everything that I explain, it'll cover, in fact, it won't just cover the science behind carnivore, it'll also be covering the science of why plants are like killing themselves a little bit,
Hmm.
because I think that's a little bit important to understand why plants don't want you to eat them. It's not just because of phytotoxin content. They literally have a very inefficient enzyme which causes this like constant generation of reactive oxygen species, which skyrockets vitamin E, and now vitamin E, oh, now you get tons of vitamin E, and then you get less iron. Not only do you get less iron, you get less other less of other vitamins and minerals. Because if vitamin and mineral interactions, when you up one, you lower the other. So if you have
That's right.
really, really high amounts of zinc, now you're going to get really, really low amounts of selenium, and you're going to absorb barely any selenium. So there's a whole science behind it. I'll be covering all of it in the book as well as my YouTube channel. So there's two options. Honestly, you can
That's
either
right.
choose it in book format or you can choose it in video format. It doesn't matter. But the important part is to understand why it works. And honestly, you could probably give it to your doctor and
Right.
they might be able to learn a lot from it because it's
Yeah.
a pretty hardcore biochemistry. There's a
That's
lot of
right.
like
That's right.
references thrown everywhere,
That's
but
right. You know what's funny about that comment is I can't remember exact year I got my master's in nutrition and functional medicine, but I've been practicing medicine for 29 years. So when did I take biochemistry? It's been a minute, right? Well, I had to kind of take it again because of the master's in nutrition and functional medicine. So most of the doctors out there learned this stuff years ago and they just don't remember the details. And I think that so one of the things it's so funny literally while you were kind of commenting, I was thinking to myself, I want to make sure he hears from me and the audience hears from me that even the doctor with all of these degrees after their name, I have an MBA, I have a master in nutrition, I have an MD. Uh, there's so much value in hearing a guy like you who's doing the research, get in front of the YouTube. I'm on my way home. I can just listen to a quick video and then it'll say, "Oh yeah, that's right. Maybe I should be talking about this topic as well." So you add so much value to the world, not just to the layperson, but to the doctor who's busy. And most doctors just don't have time to either create content or just have time to review a study, let alone read some type of book that talks about these topics. So I just want to say we appreciate what you're doing. I'm happy you're type A personality. You got to get the answer. I appreciate that. And that's going to be a great value. So as we're kind of wrapping up this video, I do want to say to the audience who's either listening to this on a podcast app or on YouTube, I'm going to pick his brain with a couple of more topics. So we'll have a couple of video shorts as well. So you can hear more from Blaise. But as we're kind of wrapping up, my friend, as it relates to you thinking about your own life, how you plan to protect your nest moving forward, are there other areas in your life you're really trying to give extra attention? Like I recently got a trainer. I wanted to, make sure that exercise was good. So what other areas are you going to focus on over the next year?
That's a very good question. There's a lot actually. So, for instance, just the nutritional perspective, because it's important to understand nutrition, but I want to sort of optimize it the best I can.
Hmm.
Which, for instance, quite literally there is a difference when it comes to aging and a lot of this cellular damage. The difference between eating pork, for instance, and eating like lamb or eating beef, there is a
Hmm.
difference because of deuterium content and polyunsaturated fat content, which is once again more susceptible to lipid peroxidation. So I want to understand like nutrition even more or the best that I can even further to give like the most optimal um, biochemistry nutritional guide that I possibly can, as well as understanding just a lot of arguments. So, for instance, the philosophical argument of why exactly is it bad or good to like kill animals? Is it ethical to even eat animals in the first place? Right? There's a lot of that. Understanding the world as a whole, I think, is very, very important, and that's probably the biggest part that I plan. One of the biggest things that I plan on teaching on my channel. It's not just carnivore; it's understanding so many concepts about the world. It could be philosophy, it could be understanding the basics of game theory, for instance, which is
Hmm.
really important in understanding why people interact a certain way. For instance, there are so many things at the world that I think it's really important to understand because in the age of AI, I think this is going to sort of topple things and make things very tricky because
Hmm.
suddenly specialists are going to have a very big problem. And I am going into the specialty field, by the way. So I probably might have a big problem because of this. Uh, because AI basically all it does is it takes all of my information and it just
That's right.
shoots it back at you. So
That's
you
right.
can if you know the general, this is why I think it's very important to be a generalist in this case and understand many topics. Because if you don't understand a broad range of topics, then what ends up happening is you can't ask AI the right questions in this
Mhm.
case, or you can't necessarily get AI to do the thing that you want it to do because you don't necessarily understand enough about it. And then now you have to ask AI like details about it. And it could give you misinformation, by the
Right,
way,
right.
because
Yeah.
all AI is just consolidating tons of this information. So if you ask it, why are seed oils healthy? Then it'll give you why seed oils are
Right.
healthy,
That's right. That's right.
even though they aren't. So
That's
it's
right.
like,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right. I actually did that recently when I just searched a topic with AI, and I did it both ways. I said, why is it healthy? Why is it unhealthy? And it may have been the cholesterol thing. And they gave great answers for both. And, so with no attempt to tell you, by the way,
Yeah.
the other thing is true too, so yeah, so that's a problem. So I love AI. Like I said, I write my notes with AI now. But I think for what we're talking about, all influencers will sound very smart because they all have a way to support their argument. So I think that's great. But I'm glad for you. When it comes to beyond your YouTube channel, let's repeat the YouTube channel and any other social media you want people to be aware of.
Okay, so first my YouTube channel once again, at Blaise V, Blaise, and then a V. I'm the guy who's looking like this or something.
Yeah, that's you.
I I do that sort of a
That's
look.
right.
Also my Substack, I plan on posting pretty much
Yes,
like short kind of versions of some of my videos on
that's
Substack
right.
as well.
Yeah.
My Patreon is a little bit not necessarily it's more so just understanding. I think that there's a lot of important things in the world, and not all of them can necessarily fully be explained by science yet.
Hmm.
So that's where I talk about basically personal experience and why I think personal experience is one of the best ways of knowing.
Yep.
Because, for instance, there's a difference between science and personal experience. And the problem is that personal experience is probably your best way of knowing right now because most science is like fraudulent, bought out, or there is some sort of p hacking, data manipulation. There's a lot of really shady stuff going on with the science. And I have a video on that actually, like 96.2% of science is fake. And it's kind of scary because when you look at that, you realize that you can't rely as much. It's really scary because you can't rely as much on science anymore because so much of the recent science is just bought out, or it's
Hmm.
suddenly just for some reason they can't replicate the study. Oh, suddenly they try to reproduce the study and they get the exact opposite result now, and they find no statistical significance. And it's just it's pretty crazy. So yeah, there's that as well. You can also follow my Twitter, at
Yeah.
Blaise V. I have to have like I think three E's at the end of my name because somebody else took Blaise V. So I mean
You gotta do what you gotta do.
yeah, that sort of sucks. You could probably just follow I don't know if I'll post on Instagram, but I try to all I'm trying to do is get this information out because
That's
I think
right.
it's really important to understand a lot of this stuff. And being educated, especially in the future, I think is going to be very, very important because in the case of technology and AI, with great power comes great responsibility.
Mm.
And it also that sort of means that the responsibility of knowing a lot more because you have to be able to piece together certain things and know whether or not this could be true, this isn't true, whether or not this is more likely to be true, whether or not this is more likely to be true. So yeah, I think that's a really really big one. So that's why I plan on covering not just carnivore, but as many topics as I possibly can educate people on, and like evidence-based things and
That's
all that
right.
stuff.
Yeah,
So yeah.
well, I think we're excited. And you won't be at 3,000 subscribers for long. I've looked at the quality of your videos and it's like you've been doing it much longer. So I do appreciate all the work you're putting into it. Again, making my job easier because I want the world to be metabolically healthy, rather they do low carb, keto, carnivore, and I got some plant-based people in my practice, so I'll work with them to the extent I can and support them as well. So I really appreciate you. I'm glad we connected. We're definitely going to collaborate some more. Again, guys, we're going to do a couple of videos short, so check that out on the channel. So thank you, Blaise V. Make sure people know what the V stands for.
V stands for Handeploof in Dutch, which is an which is
That's why we
another
say
way.
V. That's right. That's why we say V.
Yeah, we'll
And
just stick with V in this
that's
case.
right.
Uh,
That is what I'm talking about. So thank you, my friend. And we'll talk momentarily. But for the audience who checked us out today, I appreciate you. In today's video, we learned about the benefits of understanding the biochemistry of our diets by gaining knowledge about how different nutrients interact with our body at a molecular level. We can make more informed dietary decisions as we move forward and make choices about diet. I encourage you to always consider the biochemistry of the foods you consume. By understanding how different nutrients affect our health and metabolism, we can better tailor our diets to meet our individual needs. Remember, a nutritious diet not only provides us with the energy we need to function, but it also plays a crucial role in preventing disease and promoting overall well-being. So let's continue to educate ourselves about the biochemistry of our diet and make decisions that support our health and vitality. So I thank you again for coming to this episode of the Protecting Your Nest podcast. And until the next episode, continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.